Bum 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 bum. Well. Did somebody ring the dingster?
Well. Spring cleaning?
There's a part in the theme that sounds straight out of Indiana Jones, and I can't unhear it.
It sounded like Williams through and through. There were so many times where I'm like, there's Star Wars. I hear Star, especially with, I'm like, dude, we're just basically doing the Jawas theme with Otis.
That boy Williams really be out here. Man, Michael's in the chat.
Look at him.
We miss you, Michael.
They said it couldn't be done, but he's there.
He's there. Check out my Superman shirt, Michael. Isn't that epic, dude? Isn't it skibbity?
That's exactly what I'd call it.
Yeah. The C in DC Comics stands for skibbity.
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah.
Oh, Drew, it's been a little bit.
It has been a little bit. I guess let's go ahead and just do our intro real quick since nobody's in here. Sorry. I forgot Michael's in here. No, I'm just kidding.
What's the difference?
We'll do the intro real quick, I guess, and then we'll kind of jump into things.
Gotcha.
See if people join in, and if not, then pain, suffering. It'll just be Michael, who ditched us. Michael. He hates us. Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Banter Fodder podcast. I'm your host, Drew, and today I'm only joined by Jimmy Jam, the Walker, Texas Ranger man. Unfortunately, Michael has had a pretty rough month, so just be keeping him in your thoughts and prayers. But thankfully, he is chatting in our comment section right now, which is pretty fun. But yeah, let's see. There's a few people actually chatting in the chat, so I'm going to go ahead and read a few comments real quick. Matt WBT's House of Random says, my uncle was friends with the writer of Superman 4. That's pretty cool. Yeah. I still haven't watched, the Donner sequels, or not the Donner sequels, the Christopher Reeve sequels. So
one Donner sequel.
Yeah. Well, kind of.
Yeah. We got the Donner cut, so
we did. But yeah, that is still really cool though. And then obviously Michael is here in the chat, which is fun. But I wish he could be in our discussion with us right now. But anywho, it's been a while. We were on a bit of a break for the holidays. So it feels good to be back.
You've graduated since.
I've graduated from college. I'm living that unemployed lifestyle now. But yeah, it was a huge accomplishment. And speaking of accomplishments, December was a huge month for the podcast. We had over 1,000 views on the YouTube channel and gained I think over 23 subscribers or something like that. So may not seem like a lot in the grand scheme of things, but it's we're growing and it's pretty awesome. And we do really appreciate everyone who has tuned in since we started this thing. But But yeah, and then like you were mentioning, Michael's been doing music. We only have one of those music fodder episodes out, but we're gonna frequently, as frequently as we can. Michael's gonna do like some really awesome piano covers of different tracks from movies and television. So be on the lookout for that. We already have one up right now, and it's like a rendition, a mashup of the John Williams Superman theme and the Hans Zimmer Superman theme, and it's awesome.
Yeah.
So definitely check that out. I'll definitely link it in the description whenever we upload this onto the podcast feed. And then let's see. Matt WBT said 4 is better than 3, but that's not saying much.
I'm really excited to get to those. I've seen the theatrical and Donner cut of 2, but I haven't gone past that. So I'm looking forward to eventually watching those.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to be getting around to those real soon. I may, we'll see. After the stream, I may watch Superman 2. I don't know yet, but I can't decide. Like, I've read a lot of conflicting things. Like, people are like, go with the Donner cut first, but then other people are like, go with the theatrical first. And I kind of like, that's the impasse that I'm at right now. It's like, which way do I go?
My memory is I definitely prefer the Donner cut, but I don't want to say anything because there's actually there's things that I do prefer about the theatrical, but
interesting.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm really looking forward to just watching the rest of those. And then like, other DC films that I've missed out on, which aren't a lot because I've seen a lot, but yeah. Give me one second.
I think weirdly enough, we haven't really announced it in the podcast, but we're going to kind of do some off and on like Batman, Superman reviewing movies of different actors who have donned those mantles. And aside from this one of the ones that I'm maybe most looking forward to is Batman Forever, which you haven't seen. And I'm really excited to talk about that because I don't know. I have thoughts on that one, but anyways, we'll get there later.
Yeah, and we're kind of approaching it. It'll be a little bit like infrequent. It's not going to be like you're getting Superman and Batman episodes like every week. That way we can talk about other stuff too. But we just felt like with James Gunn's Superman coming out this year, it was a good time to kind of jump into like Superman and Batman. And then also James and I and some of our besties are reading through a bunch of comic books right now, a bunch of DC comics, and that's been super fun. So it just felt like a natural thing to do. But we're kind of gonna treat it similar to how we're handling the Bond franchise, which, by the way, that will return eventually. So stay tuned for that. But yeah, we're definitely looking forward to jumping into all the different DC superheroes, which is Superman and Batman. No. Forget about the rest of them. No. Actually, we're going to cover Black Adam next.
Maybe not.
One of the movies of all time.
For sure.
But yeah. So, it's been a while since we've really done anything. So I think just because like it's been such a long amount of time and we've watched a lot of movies over the holidays, I think we just kind of jump straight into this review instead of like going over like 50 different movies that we've watched just for the sake of time. So we're breaking the mold a little bit with our first episode of the year, but it'll be worth it. So Superman,
the movie
from 1978. I think that we should start this off, you know, the way that we do with a lot of our big franchise or like big character conversations. Superman is a character that everyone knows about, even if they've never seen a Superman movie, even if they've never read a comic book or consumed any sort of media that is related to Superman. Everyone knows who he is. This character has had such an impact on pop culture and media in general. I mean, if you look at one of the biggest anime franchises, Dragon Ball is basically a carbon copy. Like Goku is a carbon copy of Superman, and it's because Toriyama loved the character so much. So he's such an iconic character that stood the test of time. And so with that being said, I'm really curious to hear about your history with the character and then with this film.
Yeah, so growing up, I can't remember which came first here. Growing up, I know I had seen this movie in particular once as a kid. And I don't really remember a whole lot about my experience. I remember I think I liked it. But I don't have really in-depth thoughts. I know I watched it with my mom probably on like a Saturday afternoon. And as a kid, I was just like, oh, that's fun, and kind of moved on. The other thing that I know him from that had a much bigger impact on me as a child was the DC animated universe. I would watch, I would watch Batman and Superman for sure, but whenever I was watching cartoons growing up, what really was coming on a lot more than that was Justice League. I lived and breathed the Justice League cartoon. I love that. I still love that show. It's amazing. And it really is probably my first exposure to a huge majority of like the DC heroes. Like growing up, to me, like Wally West was the Flash, John Stewart was the Green Lantern.
Yeah.
Like that is who those heroes were to me because of that show. And so I really love Superman in it. I just I love his costume. I love him as the leader. I was a fan of that. But I really, outside of that, everybody else got, and I played a lot of the Death of Superman video game on the Super Nintendo, and that game rules, by the way. It's so cool. But outside of that, he didn't really have a massive presence for me, because I never watched Smallville, and there's, outside of the one video game, we don't really have any other good Superman games and stuff. And I watched Superman Returns once as a kid and didn't like it and remember almost nothing about it now. So you've got all the Spider-Man movies coming out. Batman always has a movie coming out. X-Men, like, so much, since I wasn't really reading comics as a kid, my exposure to them were video games and cartoons and movies. And it just hit a point to where like Superman just wasn't, just a real big presence. And this will probably depending on the fan, you'll be like, oh, well, this is so unfortunate. I didn't really begin to love Superman again until Man of Steel. Full disclosure, I love Man of Steel. I think it's phenomenal. And maybe people would say that's because my only exposure to it was like a cartoon or whatever. But as a film, I think it's fantastic. And I did that thing that a lot of people do and that I sometimes tend to do, which is you kind of let the external conversation influence things. And so I kind of, because of my love for Man of Steel and so many people's hatred of it and like the Reeve movie as the gold standard, I kind of built up this like bitterness and cynicism, like, just a jadedness towards Superman the movie. And I was like, well, that's a stupid movie anyways. I don't want to watch your dumb movie, blah, blah, blah. And so that kind of calmed down over the years. I relaxed on some fandom stuff, and I rewatched this a few years ago, and I was like, dang, this is not a bad movie. This is actually good. Um, and so that's kind of where it's at for me. And then I rewatched it again tonight, and I'm like, I might even like this more this time. So, like, kind of unshackling myself from just weird fandom stuff and being like, let me just enjoy what I'm going to enjoy. I ended up like, I really like this movie a lot now. And it's not perfect to me. I still got some issues with it, but just as this piece of like fun comic book escapism entertainment, I get why it's a classic. So I've definitely come around a good bit on it.
Yeah. No, I'm right there with you. Actually, first off, I'm gonna read a few comments. So Michael said, I really didn't grow up on Superman. Smallville was pretty much my first exposure. I still love that show, and Superman Returns was my first Superman movie. Coincidentally enough, it was my first Superman movie as well. And Michael said he's actually eager to watch it again. Brandon Barnes said Henry Cavill was excellent as worthy as a Superman as Christopher Reeves, and I absolutely agree.
100%.
I love Cavill as Superman. Actually, funny enough, the last movie that I watched of 2024 was Man of Steel. So,
so good. It
was awesome. Then Brandon also said Superman saving the people on the train track is indelible an image in my childhood mind as any.
That's a great image. There's a lot of great images in this movie. And like the more comic book movies come out and the more blandly they're made, the more I realize like, man, comic books are a medium, like they are a visual medium, you know. It's all about the splash pages and telling stories through pictures and stuff, which means if there's any genre that should consistently excel at like storytelling through images, it should be this genre. But usually it's very basic looking movies. And so when you come across a movie like this that has like, when we get into our review proper, there's a few shots in this that I just think like, man, that's it. Like that immediately became a piece of like, you know, just cinematic iconography, like that right there. I mean, the obvious, just Superman flying by the camera in the atmosphere, like that's it. That's so immediately recognizable. But there are also shots in the first act. I'll say the first act of the movie is overall my favorite. I think it's pretty much perfect. Like it's, I messaged you and Michael. I'm like, I think everything to do with like the early Krypton scene and then everything with Smallville is, especially like the Smallville stuff. I'm like, this just feels like pure timeless Americana. Like the image of when he kicks the football and it goes soaring and the camera's just behind. I'm like,
yeah,
that image, just pause it right there, frame it. That's perfect.
It's awesome.
Or the image of Ma Kent putting her hand on the window, looking at Clark out in the wheat field with the sunset. I'm like, that's beautiful. My goodness, it just looks gorgeous. So yeah, there are so many moments where it's like Donner knew that, boy, if you just get everything just right for some of those images, like Brandon said, it's going to leave a mark and you're just always going to remember, even if you don't remember the plot or anything, decades later, you're going to remember what that looked like. You're like, yes. I don't remember what happened, but there's a scene where he's like on a train track. And like, I just remember thinking it looks so cool. It's like, yeah, that's the power of like images.
100%. Yeah, there's several shots that like really stick out to me. I sent one in our group chat of it's whenever Jonathan Kent and Clark are they're walking towards the farm and it's this wide angle and like there's this particular frame in that shot that it looks like a painting. And like there's a lot of shots
like
in
a Norman
film.
Rockwell painting, you know? Like
like there's a lot of shots in this film that like they were so intentional with the way it looks visually. And it it really does make a lot of modern comic book movies stick out like a sore thumb. And like I don't want to be that guy that's just, you know, constantly trashing on Marvel or on like recent
I love
DC
a lot
movies or
of
whatever.
I love a
Yeah,
lot of the comic book movies that have come out recently.
absolutely. But it just goes to show that like they've kind of not Marvel, but just like a lot of comic book films in general have kind of lost their identity. Like they kind of forgot that like comic books are a visual medium. Like when you read a comic book, like one of the things that you're looking for is good artwork.
Yeah.
Like people criticize comic books that have bad artwork. So it's like how do you stray so far from that? I don't get it.
Yeah. We got another comment from actually got Brennan Barnes said the frustrated football kick. He is superior to everyone else and can't show it. Yeah, I should have looked up the name of that actor who plays young Clark, but I think he's great. And then Josh Sale said, I read my first ever comic a few months back, All-Star Superman. We just read that as well. And he said, went on to read Supergirl, Woman of Tomorrow. Now I couldn't be more excited for Gunn's DC. Gunn is such a great creative. Yeah, what's funny is I was probably more down on like comic books and like comic book movies than ever like a few months ago, and I wasn't getting super hyped for the Gunn universe, but I think there's just something happened and I did it like a 180 and I'm like, no, I love DC. And so we read All-Star Superman. I've got Women of Tomorrow in. I haven't read it yet, but I know you just read that and loved it.
Yes,
so
it's phenomenal.
I'm really excited. And then this was a quote that I was going to bring up in relation to what Brandon said, but Michael's already done it for us in the comic books, or in the comic books, in the comments.
Michael is dope in the comics.
Michael is dope in the comics. But he brought up a quote that I had written down while watching it, where Clark is talking to Jonathan Kent, and he says, is it showing off if someone is doing the thing he is capable of doing? Is a bird showing off when it flies? And I thought that quote was fantastic. And I love that, you know, it doesn't spend a whole long time on Clark's youth, but I think the time it does spend there is really well done, where he's like, you're just thinking of what this would be like to a teenage boy who's basically like 90% of his brain is just thinking about, you know, how to impress the cheerleaders or something. You're like, that's what being a youth is. And to be able to do the things he did and to know he'd be the most amazing, popular person in the world if they could see what he does. And the logic he uses kind of makes sense, especially as a teenager, being like, it's not like I'm cheating, you know, I am doing what I can do. You know, you don't get mad at a bird when it flies, it just flies. Like, I can fly, why can't I fly? And so yeah, I thought the amount of for the amount of time they spent on it, the frustration of doing what he could do but not being allowed to was really well done.
Yeah, I agree. And then I like that they follow up that frustration that he has with him just being like after, I can't remember the character's name, but the guy who flips the tables after and like knocks all the football equipment on the ground. You know, Superman kicks, or Clark kicks the football. And he knows that, like, you know, I can't be showing off. But then he goes ahead and starts speeding down, which I honestly really love the scene of him running and like racing the train. There's just something about it that it feels like a classic comic book moment. But it's got those vibes. It's got the same kind of vibes actually that like Back to the Future has. Like, it's like, man, I want to be doing that right now. That looks so much fun.
To me, it felt like Tobey Maguire Spider-Man jumping across rooftops in Spider-Man 1. Like when he's realizing how much fun he can have with it.
Yeah, and like I love it. That's one thing I do love about origin stories with superheroes. It's like you gotta let the superhero have a little bit of fun with their powers, you know?
Yeah.
When they're like first learning them. But I love that contrast of like, all right, well, he's been holding back, but like he kind of reaches a tipping point, and then he's like, you know what? I'm gonna show off. I'm gonna show them that I can get back to my house in like 2 seconds. And he doesn't even like hide his identity like when he's doing this. Like the people on the train see him, which I think is kind of fun because it's like I feel like in a lot of Superman stories, there's always like these stories that people in Smallville have of like Superboy or like this super powered being who's, you know, doing stuff, but they never like quite figure out who it is. So I don't know. It was just a fun little like moment that really spoke to me this rewatch.
Yeah. Because he's not thinking about all as much of the hide the identity. Like obviously he is in terms of like he has to hide his powers and everything, but when he's just out in the field, like he's gonna do what he wants. And I love the little cocky little stand he's doing whenever he's at the truck, just kind of leaning up as they pass by.
Yeah.
It's really fun. Brandon in the comments said, it's so important given his etymological link to the philosophical figure of the Übermensch, Nietzsche's Superman, making someone genuinely superior, serviceable to everyone else, contra Nietzsche. Yeah, I love, that's part of what makes Superman really interesting to me. Like, it's annoying to me when people say because of how powerful he is, he's not, like, he's too powerful to be interesting. But what I find it like part of what makes him interesting is that with this very like godlike power, like the humility that he constantly shows, and that kind of, I don't know, there's what makes superheroes interesting is usually never really power levels. It's about the stories they're telling, like the emotional stories they're telling, the character arcs they're telling, and you can use whatever power level you want. You just got to find the right story for it. And what I think with Superman is a lot of the times they do good jobs of being like, yes, he's got all of these powers, blah, blah, blah. But the excitement isn't just seeing, oh, can he punch harder than the other guy? Well, of course he can punch harder than the other guy. That's why it's not interesting. It's like, no, it's never really about that. So I don't know, I think giving him the powers he has, but also making him reflect the ideals he does, like putting those things together, to me does make a compelling character. So what were there any other what all were the standouts within this first act? I feel like it's kind of easier to talk about the movie in half. Like there's everything pre-Metropolis and post-Metropolis, because it feels pretty different to me.
They're it's almost like they're two different movies in a lot of ways. I feel like there's enough of the lighter tone in like the Smallville moments, like the train sequence, I think is like a really good shout for that. But yeah, we'll get to the tonal differences a little bit later. But I'm with you. I love so much about the first half of the film. And it's the first act is definitely my favorite as well. I love the way Krypton looks. I love the Kryptonian costumes.
So cool. The silver weird glowy suit.
Yes. I was trying to look into like how they made that, and I was reading they used like these like really small, like microscopically small like pieces of glass or something like that to make the light reflect. It was a really interesting little trivia. But yeah, I love just the look and the feels of Krypton. I think that's one thing that's, you know, like it feels like every live action adaptation has done right. They can do Krypton, but this version feels really different, but it still feels alien and it like with the weird glowing effect. Just
so leaning into the sci-fi, you know.
Yes, absolutely. And like I love the use of all the miniatures and the sets and the production design is just really like outstanding for me on Krypton.
You know,
And
whenever I oh sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say whenever I first watched it a few years ago, like for the first time since a kid, and I was still kind of had the residue of like being anti this movie because I love Man of Steel. I was watching it, and whenever that camera is like hovering over Krypton and we're getting closer to the city and it's all the model work and everything, I was like, dang it, this is good. this is cool. I wasn't supposed to like this. And like that whole sequence played out, and you got freaking Marlon Brando as Jor-El,
and
who just immediately lends so much gravitas.
Yes, and I love like all of the faces of like the different like Kryptonian leaders, like in the background for the trial for Zod and the other characters. Like there's just something about it that feels like really grand.
Yeah,
and like and even when we get to Smallville, it still kind of like maintains that feeling. It's the first half of the film is kind of slow, like in a good way. It's like very intentionally like paced, which I'm a massive fan of it. And then I guess one little final tidbit about Krypton, I love whenever the sun starts coming in and then like everything on Krypton like is red.
Yeah,
such a cool like visual technique. But yeah, and then I'd say another thing that I love in the first half is Jonathan's death is like really effective.
Yeah,
I
teared up.
Yeah, same. It is very emotionally effective. Just a really good build up to it, and I like that. Even when he was a small child, when Clark was a small child, they alluded that he had like heart problems. So it was kind of one of those things where you're just like waiting for it to happen.
Yeah, waiting for the shoe to drop.
But whenever it does happen, you just like it feels a little bit unexpected, I guess. Like I think the way that they pull that off was really good.
Because the scene is so, I don't know, so happy beforehand. And I think like something that both this and Man of Steel did really well is, you know, you've got Jonathan Kent and Jor-El as the two father figures of his life. And I think just to kind of anchor the film in something that feels important and serious, both adaptations have cast like excellent actors in the roles. You know, Man of Steel, you've got Kevin Costner and Russell Crowe, obviously phenomenal talent there. And then here you got Marlon Brando and Glenn Ford. And I think both of the actors here just do such a good job of immediately like grounding you in this story. Like Marlon Brando walking around that awesome set at the beginning with the three convicts and just reciting their crimes and everything. It immediately makes everything feel like, I don't know, prestigious. You know, it's like, no, we're not making a silly little movie. Like, this is a real movie. We've got freaking Vito Corleone, all right? We're making something real. And then having Glenn Ford as Jonathan Kent, who's taking the role super seriously. It's this kind of like, you can kind of relax your shoulders and breathe out. You're like, okay, we're not watching something dumb and silly. Like, this is real with real actors giving phenomenal performances and stuff. And I think in just his few short scenes, Ford makes Jonathan so likable. Like he's such a likable figure, and he's got like the kindness with which he kind of imparts the instructions is just so endearing, like when he's just saying, I know that you're put here for a reason, like he knows that for sure. And then to just kind of be like, but I also know that that reason isn't making touchdowns. And like he's like just kind of, making this kind of fatherly advice, like couching it within banter so that he's not, feeling like he's being lectured, and immediately just kind of makes Clark smile with that and puts his arm around him like, oh my gosh, what a guy. I thought he was just really great. And then with the death scene itself, I will say I think the death scene is far more effective here than Man of Steel. I've never really been a fan of the tornado scene. I think it's too contrived. And I think the point of Jonathan Kent's death is to show that Superman can't save everyone. Yeah. And I think the weird contrived, like, no, don't show off your powers and save me from a tornado, doesn't really get that point as well across, because really he could have saved him, like he could have. And I think in this case, with it being a heart attack, there was nothing that Superman could have done. For like, he has that line to Martha, for all the things I can do, I couldn't save him, because it's just his powers have no bearing on what he's experiencing. And so just that kind of nonchalant after school day, having him just die out there like that, with there being nothing he ever could have done, to me is just far more emotional and a lot more like impactful for the point that it's making.
Yeah, I agree. I don't hate what Snyder did with Jonathan's death, but I definitely prefer Jonathan's death having more emphasis on like Superman can't save everyone, and I think that like that just adds another interesting layer to his character, because he is this all-powerful character, and people view him as, oh, like he can't be stopped by anything. And I think, showing him as this character where he can hear people across the world, he can save like whoever, but having that of like, well, he can't save everyone. He can't even save like a loved one from a heart attack. Like,
yeah,
that has so much weight to it. I'm going to go ahead and read a few comments. So Michael said, not that we have to compare, but for me, Russell Crowe is a better Jor-El than Brando. There's a softness and compassion I feel with him as a father that I didn't feel with Brando.
Yeah, I guess I can see that. Like, I definitely feel the more kind of compassionate father angle from Crowe, but there's a kind of like, I don't know, austerity to Brando. Like, if I gun to my head, I probably would say that, yeah, I prefer Russell Crowe. There's still like this kind of, sense of austere authority to Brando's performance that feels other, and it doesn't really feel familiar, which would make it not feel super fatherly, but it's still, I don't know, that performance really sticks out to me.
Yeah, I love both performances a lot. And I think, again, like I was saying with Krypton, it's not hard to get it right in live action. It seems like everyone kind of has done it well.
Yeah. And done it so different,
Yeah, very, very differently. And I feel the same way about Jor-El. They're both different, but I love both. Do I slightly prefer Russell Crowe's? Probably. But I really loved Brando in this, which is interesting because I guess Christopher Reeves didn't feel the same way. I think he even went on to say that he felt like Brando phoned in his performance or something like that.
Well, famously, Brando really didn't memorize his lines, and so the whole shooting day had to cater to making like, I think this is an instance of like people holding up his lines for him off camera, because they even did that with The Godfather. Like there's stories in which Robert Duvall had his lines like on his torso when he had his back to his camera, so Brando could read off of him. Like, you know, he jeopardized the Apocalypse Now shoot. He was a mess, and he was frustrated everybody he worked with. And when you look at like Christopher, this was such a passion project for Christopher Reeve. He loved this, and he took this movie so seriously. And so I can it's very clear that even though I like Brando's performance, Brando didn't really take the job seriously because he didn't take a lot of his later career jobs seriously. And so I could understand that really rubbing Christopher Reeve the wrong way, of being like, dude, we are pouring our passion and blood, sweat, and tears into this, and you're reading lines off stage. Like, this is,
yeah. Let's see. And then Brandon was just kind of like shouting out some of the stuff that we were talking about, and he agreed. Mitch out here doxing me. Just that's crazy. But bro, come down here and we'll we'll have a little snow day, dude. We'll throw some snowballs at Jimmy Jam.
Oh my gosh, I want snow. I'll join y'all.
We'll move out here and you can have some.
Anything else in this first act?
I feel like I kind of hit a lot of the highlights for me. But that's crazy, bro.
Just document. Yeah, I think a lot of what I love about it's been covered. I guess one last quick comment, or a couple, one in Smallville and one in Krypton. I love the destruction of Krypton with all of the crystals like coming out from the ground and launching everything into all, like the red light. Like you said, there's some weird angles that we see people falling through, and it just feels like the destruction turns into this, like, I don't know, you don't really have any sense of bearing, and just it's this chaotic destruction by the end of it, which to me contrasts really in a really cool way with the totally like serene, sterile environment of Krypton beforehand. So watching it like descend into this jagged hellscape as everybody falls towards this burning, like it looks cinematically, it looks really cool.
Yeah.
And then I think the last moment we spend in Smallville is one of the strongest moments in the scene, or in the whole movie, whenever he's telling his mom that he's got to travel to Metropolis, and they're hugging and they're crying and stuff. He puts his arm around her shoulder, and the camera is from behind, and then the camera just starts rolling over the wheat field as Williams' beautiful piece just swells and swells. And then as the camera rolls closer and closer to them, you realize it's on a crane, and so it just swoops above their heads and just looks out over the field. And I'm like, oh man,
that so much.
This is so cool.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I like that. Again, everything basically. Everything up to like the 50-minute mark, I'm like, I've got no notes on what you can improve. I love all of this.
Yeah, no, I love the way that's shot at the end, and I'm a huge sucker for, you know, sunsets or sunrises and stuff. So that golden hour shot is awesome. So how do you feel? Before we get to Metropolis, I was going to actually ask you, how do you feel about the Fortress of Solitude?
Oh, that's right. I love it. I love there's a big wide shot after he throws the crystal and the fortress is creating. Whenever the fortress kind of finalizes off on the horizon, there's this wide shot of him in the bottom left corner and just the fortress looming back there. And it's so cool to me. And it kind of is to me the platonic ideal of it. Like my favorite, I think lore wise, it's really cool what they do in Man of Steel, having the Fortress of Solitude basically be a crashed Krypton ship. Like that's really neat. But I think the platonic ideal of the Fortress of Solitude is the jagged crystal structure. Like that's my favorite look for it. What about you? I feel like there's a thought behind the question there.
Yeah. So I love the look of the Fortress of Solitude. I also love that it's not like they're not actually out in like the Arctic or anything like that. They didn't film like out in actual snow. But I love the set design of whenever Clark is just like wandering around through these glaciers.
Hope you find your dad, buddy.
But
I thought.
I think the only thing that kind of bothered me about this scene is he just kind of like, I don't know, knows to throw this crystal in like the exact right spot. And I was just kind of like, I was like really into this. And then I thought about it for a second and I'm like, wait a second. And like, not that I need like 100% like perfect logic 24/7, but I don't know. It just it took me out for a second and it made me chuckle.
Yeah. I could have the thought of like, I don't know what it was that it was almost like this. My explanation I tell myself is that, you know, that whole period of time he spent in the little rocket ship on his way to Earth with all of the learning, like there's a lot of like just imprinting happening there. And so like whatever drive that was like in him that woke him up that night. Also, I love the scene when he wakes up, that like that kind of eerie quiet in the night where he's like, there's something calling to me in the barn. To me, I feel like that's a result of whatever Jor-El was doing, like with all of the data that was like just being imparted to him on that rocket journey. It was almost kind of like this, you know, birds, you know, flock for the winter kind of thing. Like it's just this instinctual thing. Something was telling him like, hey, there's something in the barn. You're now of age. There's something in your DNA is compelling you to go to the barn. And whatever that was is the same thing that told him it's right. I don't know why, but it feels right to take this thing and to chuck it out into the Antarctic waste. So I don't think he knew what was going to happen, but I got the impression that there was just something that Jor-El had planned that was just going to act on his instinct, that was going to say, check the barn. There's something, call it, like this crystal's calling you.
Yeah.
And once you grab it, you're just going to feel like, because he didn't even really give a reason to Martha when she says, hey, where are you going? He just says north. Again, it feels like this kind of almost bird-like migratory thing of like, I got to go north. There's something telling me that I've got to go north.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I can definitely see that as being the reason. I think it would have worked for me a little bit better if maybe whenever he gets the crystal, it like just starts glowing like the closer he gets, or it like starts pulsating or something like that. Just something that like visually like gives us a little bit of a cue, or maybe he hears like a humming, or like he hears Jor-El like speaking off in the distance. I don't know. I just think like
run to Dagobah.
Yeah, exactly. I think it would have worked for me a little bit better if something like that happened, but
I could see that, because just watching it, it's like, dude, I don't know. He walked out of the snow when he chucked that crystal.
I don't know. It made me laugh whenever he just throws it and then the fortress just magically appears, and I'm like, dude, all right. But I mean, like, I don't hate it. It was just like a funny little thing.
All right. Well, speaking of how you feel about things, how do you feel about the transition this movie makes to Metropolis?
It's a pretty jarring one. But I'll say this: the first time I watched this film, when we got to Metropolis, that's when I started not loving it, and especially with Lex Luthor. But we'll get there later. I just had a preface with that. a lot of the reasons why I didn't like it as much is because I feel like it's a lot campier than the first half is. And when you start, like, you know, what, like 10, 15, 20 minutes, however long it is that you spend on Krypton, right? And then also for the most part, Smallville is pretty serious too, with, you know, a few
But
like lighthearted moments.
the comedy is very suited for the tone. You know, even
Yeah,
in
yeah.
Smallville, it's not like there's never any sense of tonal like
No, yeah.
jarring.
It feels all contained within, but once you get to Metropolis, it really does lean like pretty heavily into the campiness. And I don't, so the first time I watched it, I wasn't a huge fan. On this rewatch, it kind of grew on me a little bit. Not everything about being in Metropolis and the second half of the film works for me. But like the scene with Clark and Lois like walking down the street, and then the guy just like pulls out the gun. I kind of liked that scene like a lot.
Yeah.
Like and it kind of worked for me. And I think this like kind of feeds into like some of the problems though, because that scene works for me. You know, it's just some random criminal who's doing that. But when we get to the big bads of the film, they take that but amp it up by like 50 times. And so that's where it really loses me, because it's like I'm okay with just a random criminal being like a little bit over the top like that in this big city. And like maybe in a way that's just like showing how like this city feels larger than life, especially to Clark, who grew
You
up.
can be exaggerated. It's a comic book movie, you know.
Yeah, exactly. It's a comic book movie, but like also it could be like a fun visual, being like, hey, like, you know, Clark grew up in Smallville. Like this small farm town in Kansas is all he knows. And so I like thinking it of that way, but as you go on and get to Luthor and his henchmen, it really loses me there, because it's like, well, you established this one thing, but then like now you're stretching it like a lot. So I don't know. I'd say this second half has grown on me a lot compared to my first watch, but it's still, there's still a lot of things that I'm iffy on.
Yeah, that's basically my experience exactly. Like there are scenes throughout Metropolis that I really enjoyed. That one in the alley is one of them. Like I don't want to bring it up too much now, because I feel like we're just once we bring it up, we're gonna spend a long time. But like Christopher Reeve like makes this, like he in that scene, you know, like, oh, Lois, I think you should give him the and he just makes the scene fun, you know.
Yeah.
And just him kind of bumbling around the Daily Planet and stuff. And I whenever Superman's giving the interview and he's just being like really friendly with like the way he's joking and like just kind of like biting his teeth. Like he's just like, he's loving everything about this. He's just, so there are moments all over the place where I'm like, this is nice. This is cool. Them silhouetted against the moon above the clouds flying is like cinema, you know, like I'm okay. And like kind of poking fun at him saying things like swell and stuff. There's a lot that I do like, but every now and then we hit some bits of like the camp where I'm like, man, you just lost me there. And then, yeah, I almost none of the Lex stuff works for me. It between the three, like the three of them together, I don't just mean like, oh, it's three stupid people, so I'm going to call them the Three Stooges as an insult. I mean like tonally and slapstick wise and everything, like it feels like the Three Stooges. I grew up watching Three Stooges shorts.
Yeah.
I'm like, this feels like that. It feels like the same brand of comedy for the same audience. And I can't, I don't know what I'm supposed to think, because he's supposed to be my threat. He's supposed to be the threat of the movie, but everything about it is so stupid and ridiculous. And like, sure, technically there was a threat because like he preyed on the like, again, the exaggerated stupidity of like the government and how easy it was to access those rockets on that highway. Like,
Yeah.
So he was a threat, and that, yeah, he was launching rockets. Millions of people would have died on paper. Yeah, he's dangerous, but my experience of watching him is so, I don't know. I don't, in a movie like this, I don't like feeling this way about my villain. There could be a whole other type of movie where this is exactly the way I would want to think about the villain if it's going for more parody or something, like I would love that. But again, like there's something that just feels so classic, so classically directed about the first hour of this movie, that it feels like this kind of campiness, this brand of humor, this type of thing, it's off the table. Once you spend an hour being one kind of thing, you take off the table other types of things. And so the fact that he was like, no, I know we already committed to being this kind of movie for an hour, but now we're doing a 180 and we're being this kind of a movie now. I'm like, gosh, it feels so, boy, it clashes so hard with everything before. And so, yeah, I laugh at individual beats with Lex and Otis and stuff. But it's kind of like, I mean, I chuckled, but I wish I wasn't even chuckling right now. Like, I don't want to chuckle. So I find everything to do with Lex in this really frustrating.
Yeah, the thing about it is I love Gene Hackman, and and honestly, like, he's really fun in this movie, like, just to watch. He for some reason puts like 110% of energy into this performance, and I don't know why. But I'm right there with you. Like, I don't want to be the guy that's like, not my Lex Luthor, but I'm gonna be that guy. And it's because now I've read some comics. I've also known this character from the DC animated universe.
Clancy Brown is my
yes, sir. From other live action adaptations. I can't remember the actor's name in Smallville, but he's
Michael Rosenbaum.
Lex Luthor. Yes. And like,
I love so Eisenberg, many. By the way, I think Eisenberg is phenomenal.
Do too. And like, and hear me out. A lot of people are like, Eisenberg isn't Lex Luthor. Sure, Snyder did something a little different with the character, but he's still Lex Luthor. He still has the qualities of Lex Luthor. He's not a doofus. He doesn't have henchmen that are idiots. He is still very calculated and has a hatred for Superman and is fascinated by him all at the same time. So he is Lex Luthor when I watch Batman versus Superman. Gene Hackman as Lex Luthor, I can't even call him Lex Luthor because that's not what this character is. There's like hardly any, if at all, any like qualities that or characteristics that Lex Luthor is known for. He's either a really rich guy who puts all of his money into making weapons to kill Superman, or he's a super genius that makes weapons to kill Superman. And in this movie, he's just weird and goofy.
And everything culminates in a real estate scheme.
It's just bizarre. And like, I think another thing that's really weird for me with him is he doesn't even have a whole lot of screen time. we don't get to him until after the halfway point. And if you think about like any other origin story of a comic book character in film, we always get something in the beginning of the film that ties into this character, even if it's like a character like, let's say, Batman Begins, where we've got Ra's al Ghul and we get him in the opening, but then they save him for the big like plot twist in the end.
Yeah,
that works. But like, we don't even get an inkling of Lex Luthor in the film at all, and I don't like that, because he is one of the big bads. He's Superman's nemesis. Like, I don't know.
Yeah, I noticed watching it I watched it today before we recorded, and I noticed it's the hour and a half mark. Superman lands with Lois. They go on their little flying excursion, and I was like, I'm enjoying a lot of this, but it is weird. We're at the hour and a half mark, and the movie feels a bit plotless. Like, we get to Metropolis, and we've got no real momentum. Like, it's a lot of scenes that I do enjoy, but we're not really moving towards anything. The seeds aren't really planted for anything. We're just kind of experiencing scenes that are vaguely tied to each other, and it's not until like when the movie has less than an hour to go that we really get into the Rocket stuff. So there's a lot of disjointedness to this, because you've got a first hour of this movie that feels so strong and cohesive. Then you got this tonal whiplash of getting to Metropolis, and then when we're in Metropolis, we experience probably another like 40, 50 minutes of scenes that aren't really thematically tied with each other, plot wise don't really tie with. It's just kind of a lot of different scenes of things happening, and then basically the whole plot has to be shoved into a third act. And yeah, a lot of it feels really weird.
Yeah.
But yeah, and I agree with everything you're saying about Gene Hackman. Like, you're right. Like, he's giving it his all, and I think you could take everything about his performance, pluck it out of this movie, and put it in another movie, and I would love it.
Yeah.
Like, based on the direction he's given, I'm sure he is exceeding anything Donner asked him to do. He's great. I like the energy of his henchmen. It just doesn't belong in this movie.
No.
So yeah, there's just there's goofiness that comes up basically anytime they're here, but a little bit elsewhere. I like the scene of Superman and Lois flying, but then I find her like internal poem really cringy to me.
Yeah, I forgot about that, and I was like, man, please no.
Just to stop.
Yeah.
Yeah, but so yeah, there's stuff that comes up where I'm like, this is definitely why it's overall not my favorite Superman movie. But boy, the thing that whenever I first watched it back a few years ago and rewatching it now, though, the one thing that is above criticism to me, and is for the insane hype that this character had, just the reputation this iteration of the character has, to me, Christopher Reeve lives up to every ounce of his reputation.
Yes.
I love everything about everything he's doing here, with the bumbling Clark to the most like bastion of goodness Superman. Just every choice, every look, everything. I think he looks. My memory of the suit was that it looked a lot cheesier than it is. I looked at him here. I'm like, dang, no, he looks like Superman. Like
Yeah.
Christopher Reeve is totally perfect to me in this movie. And I love being able to say that, given my criticisms of the villain and some other things.
Yeah, I also love him as Superman. One thing I really like actually about his Superman is he's not completely stoic. Because a lot of times people view just like an entirely stoic character, but like he has a lot of charm to him as Superman. And granted, a lot of that comes through in his scenes with Lois, but like even when he's talking to like the police warden and stuff, like I don't know, there's just like this energy that he brings where he's not just like, I'm Superman and I fight for truth, justice, and the American way, but he's like,
although I do love that we get that line in.
Yes, but but even when he delivers that, it's not like a, no, I'm Superman. Like it's just he's got like this earnestness to him when he delivers his lines. And I love whenever he, like before he goes and takes Lois on the flight, I really love like the banter that they have there. Like just the way that he talks to her as Superman, and then you juxtapose that with right after that he goes back to Clark Kent. And also like just because about that scene, I love whenever he takes off his glasses and then he changes his voice and he's like, Lois, I have something to tell you. And then he's immediately like puts it back on. He's like, I was kind of nervous about this. He gets the character down perfectly.
It's when, whether he's Clark or Superman, like he's nailing it. Like, and it's like that scene that you brought up, you get to see both in one single take. And I love that when he takes his glasses off, he stands more upright, shoulders out. Like it's just his whole physical demeanor changes when the glasses come off. And like he's literally putting in two different performances depending on who he's there. And I know some people find the bumbling, especially like newer fans who don't have the nostalgia, find the bumbling a bit like over the top and don't enjoy it. I thought that would be me just because of preferences I usually have. I figured it'd be me, but I love bumbling Clark, just the constantly stammering and everything. And I love whenever she's like, what is it going to, or let me guess, it's going to your gray-haired ma back in Kansas. And he's like, oh, she's silver actually, or silver-haired actually, and she's like, is there anyone else like you back home? It's like, actually no. It's just like I just, man.
And then when he says swell and she's like, people don't use that word anymore.
It's like, well, which is like, it just kind of came naturally.
Which is so funny because you think that would be like a thing that people would say in the 70s, but even then it was dated. So I don't know. It was like one of those things where like today we have terms that, in like 10 years will be dated. So it just it felt like a very like natural.
Terms are getting dated like by the month for us right now.
Dang it, memes.
But Brandon said Skibbity.
Skibbity. We actually need, Skibbity lives on forever.
It's gonna be perennial. We need Corin Sweat Superman, or we need his Clark saying Skibbity.
Oh, please.
No, actually.
I fight for truth, justice, and the Skibbity way.
We're really gonna get the young audience with this.
And then actually give him a broccoli cut for that scene.
Yeah, he needs it. But so I'm a big fan of his Clark, and then but going back to what you had said before of him not being like just this kind of stoic figure, I also really like that. Like it's a cheesy line, but I'm happy for Superman to be a bit corny. Whenever the
Yeah.
criminal takes the crowbar and like hits him from behind and he's shaking and he's like, "Oh, bad vibrations." I'm like, gosh, that's so corny. But it's also something that like that Clark Kent would be like, oh, I'm Superman now, you know, like I'm gonna say something cool. Like that's something that he would say in that line or in that moment and be like, boy, I got him with a zinger here. So like lines like that I thought were great. And then again, the scene that you're talking about, like that, the interview, just his back and forth with Lois there, which there's there's a weird every now and then this movie, like it really leans into like the quaint, earnest 50s-ness of it, but then it puts in some really weird stuff, like the story she's writing at the beginning when she's like, how many S's in massacre? And Perry is like, oh, only one P in rapist. And I'm like, what story is she writing? Like,
Yeah.
it kind of clashed a bit, and I think intentionally so, but in a way that I didn't really love with the kind of golly gee kind of vibe of that. And I felt it a little bit as well in the interview with some of the innuendo there. I'm like, it's not that it's not like funny or clever, but it feels weird. Like when she's like, how big are you? I mean, how tall are you? I'm like, whoa.
I'm not gonna
Okay.
lie though, that part really made
Oh,
me laugh.
no, I thought it was funny for sure. Like I laughed at it, but I was
Yeah.
like, I don't know. It felt weird for the tone of the
Yeah.
scene. And then, you know, to me like bodily again, it was another like moment that made me laugh when she's like, all of your bodily functions work. She's like, do you, you know, to put it delicately, do you, and she like can't say it, and he's like, yes, and he's like, eat. like it's it, it felt weird. And then, you know, being like, what color underwear am I wearing? I'm like, Lois, what is your glitch, dude? Like, but at least throughout the whole scene, just the way Reeve is like playing off of it, he makes it all work so well to me.
Yeah.
Like there's no line any character throws at him that he's not turning into something so charming and amazing and just fun to watch. But yeah. Was there anything else about his performance that
Honestly, not really. I feel like he really, and it, for me, really lives up to his reputation. So I don't really have anything more to add about him, just because it's like he's Christopher Reeve and he's awesome in this movie and he is
yeah.
Superman. So yeah.
Yeah, I think maybe this could be a transition. I think there's another scene that I think is great, and it shows off an emotion that we really don't get elsewhere in the movie. But it's within the third act, and it surrounds a problem of mine with the movie. But his reaction to Lois's death, I think, is
Yes.
great. Like when he's looking in the air, he's like, no, 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 no. Like just like, and then that final scream and the tears in his eyes as he flies just with aimlessly up into the clouds and stuff. I think
Yes.
you know, like the movie has never given us an opportunity to see, you know, these emotions from Reeve before. And so when he's given that scene, I think he sells it super well. I think he's fantastic there. But it's I've got a lot of problems too with the third act. So it's a
So
bright
let's
spot and stuff.
yeah, let's transition to that. I was actually gonna mention the scene of Superman screaming, but I was gonna save it until we got to the ending. So this just feels like a good segue into our thoughts of the ending. So for me, I think the ending is one of my other problems. I don't like the reversing time. um especially with this being like the first Superman movie, it just feels like too big of a thing to do, and especially considering that we had the villain that we did, and so the stakes weren't as high as they should have been. Yeah, Lois dies, but I just, it doesn't feel as earned for me as it would in, I don't know, if it was done differently. So yeah, I wasn't a huge fan of taking the story in that direction. And I remember, was it in the group chat where you were talking about it, or maybe it was your Letterboxd review that I read. But I remember you said something along the lines of like the ending kind of upends everything that Jor-El was trying to all the points that he was trying to make to Clark.
Well, and totally undermines the lesson of Jonathan's death.
Yeah.
Like, you will lose loved ones, and regardless of your powers, you can't do anything. Like, that is a deeply impactful idea given Superman's abilities. And so to have that scene play out where he said he has to learn this hard lesson of I can't save everyone, and then to be like, just kidding. If I wanted to, maybe I could rewind all the way back to, like, I hate the can of worms this opens, because then you're like, well, why wouldn't he go all the way back to, and like maybe try to get Jonathan treatment or something? I don't know. I mean, I guess they already knew about the heart thing, so even reversing time wouldn't do anything. But it feels like to end your first act with that lesson of, you can't save anyone, or you can't save everyone.
Yeah, you can't save anyone, Superman.
To then end your movie by saying, actually, I kind of can, is really, really thematically frustrating. So that really doesn't, I really dislike that. And then, in addition to just hating the can of worms that just Superman being able to reverse time at will opens up, I think nostalgia has just grandfathered this ending into like something we tolerate now, like just something that's acceptable. But like, what it just kind of dawned, like, just watching it set in, like, you could never do a thing like this in a movie right now. Regardless, like, you would get so, like, this would be laughed at so hard.
Yeah.
I think because it was such a hit in the 70s and people have so much nostalgia for it, we just kind of like, we downplay the ridiculousness of it. We're like, yeah, I get it. Like, rewinding time is silly, but I'm like, no, hold on. We can't move on yet. He flew so fast around the world that he reversed its rotation. And apparently time is contingent on the rotation of this one planet in this solar system. And by reversing the rotation, rewinds time, the movie makes no attempt to think about, like, you just doomed the human race, like, to stop the rotation of the Earth like that, to reverse it like that. Everything you've done to the environment, and it's unreal. And it's especially ironic because the movie opens with Jor-El saying Krypton is about to experience a cataclysmic event, and the scientists on Krypton are saying, no, the Earth is just, it's changing its orbit or something. Basically, they're saying, like, no, it's just a slight shift of Krypton's rotation or orbit or whatever they say. So, like, it opened up with the acknowledgement that a shift like that is cataclysmic for a planet. Their change in orbit is why Krypton was destroyed. Yeah. And so then say, no, you can totally, like, tides. It doesn't matter what this is doing to ocean tides. It doesn't matter what this is doing to like just gravity, and the necessity of it moving at this speed. All of that, the fact that we saw a planet doomed because of a slight change in all of this, none of that means anything. I get to like rewind time by spinning sometimes I feel like we don't really think hard enough about how monumentally stupid reversing the rotation is. It's just,
yeah,
it's an unforgivable flaw to me in the movie. It is hilariously stupid.
Yeah, and not just that, to like pour the salt into the wound, he he reverses the rotation and then he stops and then he moves it forward again. So
Yes.
so it doesn't keep
Like-
going backwards.
Yeah, just a little. It's like a rewind and fast forward on a remote. He hit play just at the right time.
Really putting the comic in comicals,
Exactly. Yeah, there we go. It's a comedy, actually. But I just like, for all of the people are so quick to like try to point out like stupid leaps in logic and stuff in movies now, and all it takes is reading some of the critical reviews of Man of Steel in 2013, and you just think like, wait a second. He flew fast enough to reverse the planet's rotation and it rewound time. Are we forgetting that this was a thing that happened in this movie that you love? So,
and I just find it really funny that like people who hate Man of Steel, they forgive this, but then they're highly critical of Superman killing Zod and Man of Steel to save people, and it's like,
which is a far more interesting dilemma to me. And again, so Brandon just said unforgivable works for me, using his power for entirely selfish reasons.
yeah,
There is a sense in which, like, I mean, he's saving people, so there is that sense, but you also like, you get the idea of like, if it weren't Lois, he wouldn't have done this, which again is a whole can of worms of like, you kind of have to look at him with a raised eyebrow anytime he's not reversing time to save somebody. Like, I don't want that to be a power he has access to, because again, every death is called into question. Like, oh, is it just people who are like close to you that get the whole time reversal thing? So like, I just hate this introduction of this power so much. But again, like it's an uninteresting moral dilemma to me, because there is no real dilemma. He's just able to reverse it, which again, to me is just, it pales in comparison to, I know people act like it's this horrible character flaw of his in Man of Steel that he would stoop to killing. But what is powerful to me in that movie is Zod and the world engine and everything there. That's the last remnants of Krypton,
Yeah.
And the sacrifice Clark chooses to make by killing Zod and destroying the world engine and entirely denying that side of himself. And it's just the act of killing is a sacrifice to himself. Like, this is something he would clearly never in a million years want to do. And whenever he drops to his knees and screams in Man of Steel, like, that is more powerful than anything this movie achieves to me, except for maybe some of the really great stuff in the first act. But yeah, it's just like the fact that we criticize that scene in Man of Steel: The Kingdom Come, while we just kind of give the, oh geez, it's a bit silly, but oh well, to like the time reversal stuff is a bit frustrating.
Yeah, so. And also like the DC universe isn't like, time travel isn't like a new concept to it, and like even by this point of this film coming out, like, it's not the first time time travel or reversing time or going forward, whatever. It's not the first time that this has happened, but I feel like any other time that reversing time happens, the Flash, for example, there are ramifications for changing time. If you go out of your way to reverse time to save someone, there are ramifications for doing that. You see that happen to the Flash in Flashpoint. You see that happen to him in the hit film from, what was it, 2 years ago now, The Flash.
Never seen it. I don't know if I want
it's an
to.
interesting movie. Sometimes some really great stuff, but then a lot of times some really bad stuff. But The Flash has ramifications for his actions to selfishly reverse time so he can save someone who died. That's what Superman does here. And he does that and nothing happens.
Yeah, no
like
consequences at all.
Yeah, there's no indication that anything has been affected by what he's done. And so that bothers me too, because I think that I could accept it a little bit more if there was a consequence for him doing this. But he just does it and nothing happens. Nothing's different. It's just the same exact world with no impact from doing that. So
yeah. And again, it just forces you to everything going forward. Any death, you kind of have to side eye Superman and be like, "You gonna rewind this?" And then if he doesn't, you're like, "Oh, huh, interesting. Guess you didn't like that guy. If you liked him, you'd have done well." Like, it's just, I hate it. I really, really hate this whole thing. But yeah, it's unfortunate. Because again, his reaction to her death, I think, is fantastic.
Yeah, 100%.
Well, that kind of cleans up the end of my notes.
Yeah, mine as well. I don't really have any other like big thoughts or anything. But you know, it may sound like we're being a little critical or a little harsh on it, but I genuinely do like and even love like a lot about this movie, and I'd say that for the most part I'm kind of a fan of it now. Like I can see myself revisiting this. I'm still gonna have the same problems, but I'd say like having read some like two of like the most iconic Superman stories, and then just really like getting back into the DC animated universe and everything. I think that really helped me on this rewatch and gave me a little bit more respect for the character. Because I went through a similar phase of like Man of Steel came out and I was like, this is my Superman. And I was like, I avoided watching Donner's Superman for such a long time because I was like, oh, like, isn't that the one where he just saves cats and stuff like that? I'm like, I mean, yeah, that's like a good thing or whatever, but like that sounds boring and
keep your dumb baby movies.
Yeah, exactly. So I went through that whole phase. So I didn't watch it for a long time, but I think rewatching it just with having all of this like recent like history or like diving into this history of the character and what makes him so iconic really helped me on this rewatch, and it gave me some more respect for all of the great stuff. I even respect even more, but then some stuff that I didn't like as much the first time around I like a little bit more this time, but then also the bad things still stick out like a sore thumb, unfortunately. But it's I still really enjoy this movie a lot.
Yeah. Same. I'm a fan. I like it a lot. I think like it for all of my problems, and they're not small to me. Like they like you said, they do stick out like a sore thumb. Even at the worst elements, or well, I guess not the worst elements because the worst moments are just like the three villains all together. But even at least during the whole like the section after the first act, we're still within a movie that has Christopher Reeve Superman. And to me, this is just one of those performances that like you hear about it all the time. It's got such a legacy. It's got such a reputation. And then you watch it and you're like, oh my goodness, I get it. I see it. This guy is like, I get why people say like, yeah, I look at Christopher Reeve and he is Superman. I'm like, yeah, he kind of is. So
it's similar to, you know, the way we talked about Dr. No and Sean Connery as Bond. Like,
yeah,
he is that character, and there's a lot
and
of
it takes no time before you get it. You know?
Yeah, and it's the same with this. Like, you know, we don't get to Christopher Reeve until halfway through the movie, but once we get to him, you're immediately like, yeah, this guy's Clark, this guy's Superman.
Yeah, fully agree.
Well, I guess that about wraps it up. Yeah, so like we talked about before, you know, it'll be infrequent. We're not going to have like a set schedule of whenever we're going to be doing another Superman movie, or whenever we're going to be doing another whenever we're going to do a Batman film. But it's something that we're going to, you know, do throughout the year, and just really get into that DC headspace, in anticipation for Superman. And also just to look back at some really iconic movies and adaptations. So just definitely be on the lookout for that. We'll get back to Bond soon. And then also just wanted to remind you guys that, again, Michael is doing something that we're calling Music Fodder, where he'll be performing live their pre-recorded videos, but he'll be performing piano covers of different iconic tracks from films and television. We've got a lot of big movies that he's done his own renditions of themes of, that you'll be hearing soon, but eventually we'll get to some more niche stuff, but shows or movies that still have like really iconic music, that may fly a bit under the radar. But that'll be a fun thing that we'll start doing on the YouTube channel. So stay tuned for that. Yeah, and I guess one final thing real quick. What's your like hype level now for James Gunn's Superman?
That's a good question. Okay, so this is interesting. I'll just try to do a quick walkthrough and rundown of the roller coaster has kind of been to me, because he was not at all my first choice for Superman. And I think my reasons for thinking that when it was announced have almost only been furthered since, because of like, you know, like, okay, basically his niche is like really irreverent ensemble kind of like outcast family kind of stuff. You got the Guardians trilogy, you got the Suicide Squad, and now because of the weird way the canon is launching with the DCU, like the first 3 pieces of canon are like the Suicide Squad, Peacemaker season 1, and then to prove all the people who had these concerns about James Gunn wrong, the first new thing is Creature Commandos, which is an irreverent ensemble. I'm like, oh my goodness. So he's not the guy that I would have chosen, even though I do love like most of what he's done. So I had those concerns, and I was not really sure. I was off and on about different promotional stuff. And then we got the teaser for the trailer, which I'm just tired of teasers for trailers altogether. But that teaser for the trailer looked bad to me. Like it looked shot on an iPhone. No,
not even a current iPhone, like an iPhone from like 10 years ago.
It looked really, really bad to me. And I thought, if this is what this movie looks like, we're in big trouble. And then the trailer came out, and my problems there with the way it looked are definitely less in the trailer. I still think overall, visually, it's not perfectly suited to my taste. just with like the camera and the lens, like just a lot of the stuff that's going on there.
Yeah.
And I'm still really torn on the costume. I don't love the kind of padding look to it. I had to set up a bounce house, and as I was setting up the bounce house, I thought this material looks like the new Superman material. Um, so, but with that being said, the thing that kind of stuck out to me from the trailer, and it's been the thing that I keep thinking that I go back to, and it's gotten me more hyped, is like, boy, this was an unapologetically comic booky trailer where, you know, you've got a big dragon thing that he's fighting. You know, you've got I weirdly enough, I love all of the other costumes. I love Mr. Terrific and just the mask that's just suspended on the face. It's not tight, like it's just I love that. We've got Guy Gardner and his bowl cut. You know, like even though I prefer LexCorp to LuthorCorp, that just doesn't sound right. The LuthorCorp building itself looks super comic booky.
Yeah.
So I'm like, and they're selling this as like a lived-in, already thriving comic book universe. It feels like it's promising a kind of almost the DC animated universe, but on the big screen. Like, and if that's what it is, if it's even a little close to that, I'm going to be really happy with it. So I think I'm really going to like Corin Sweat in the role. I think Nicholas Hoult is going to be great as Lex. All of the other casting I really like. I love that Crypto's there. And so, yeah, I think even though I've got certain apprehensions, I've just slowly, like over the course since that trailer came out, it's got me back into comics in a huge way. I went on a huge comic book buying spree, and I've been reading a ton. And I've been watching like the animated movies and the animated shows and stuff and whatnot. So like it's kind of worked me up into a legitimate hype for it. And then I think everything about the Green Lantern show sounds amazing. And so there's kind of like secondary hype from that show that's kind of getting on Superman as well, where I'm like, okay, maybe it is a cool universe that we're building. Like I'm getting there. I'm kind of ready for this movie now, and I have no doubt that like baseline I'm gonna like it, and I think that there's potential for me to really love it. So sorry, that was a lot longer than I intended, but
no, that's okay.
I've had a roller coaster with the lead up to this movie.
I definitely was more on the optimistic side of Gunn's DC universe. Just knowing his history with comic book characters, knowing like how much respect that he has for a lot of the source material, had me pretty excited. And then also just seeing the way that he evolved the Guardians throughout the trilogy, and really delivering what I thought was a pretty fantastic cap off to the trilogy.
Yeah.
I was like, let this man cook. And then like there's a lot of stuff that he said about the DC universe, like, you know, one of his biggest inspirations was the DC animated universe, and he shouted out Justice League and Justice League Unlimited. So immediately I'm like, I'm in. But then
he's got taste, at least.
Other things that he said about Superman, like the film, the character, his understanding of it's not Superman or Clark Kent, it's Superman / Clark Kent, or like maybe he put it the other way around, but like he just seems to have like a really good understanding of the character and a really good respect for the comics. All-Star Superman being one of the big inspirations, as well as some others, which all of this stuff got me pretty excited. And then, you know, like you, I've also been getting heavily into comic books, so I read All-Star Superman. I picked up Woman of Tomorrow because it's they're doing a direct adaptation for the Supergirl movie. And at first I was like, oh, Supergirl is the second film. That's really weird. for your big DC universe. But I will say, after reading that graphic novel, I get it. I get it. I think it's honestly pretty genius, and I think this is going to be a story that a lot of people are going to love if they pull it off. If they do a good adaptation, I'm really excited about it. And then also Tom King, who wrote Woman of Tomorrow, is one of the architects for this DC universe. And he's, one of the most respected comic book writers.
He's got a screenwriting credit on Woman of Tomorrow, the movie, I believe.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's cool to see him shepherd it in the adaptation.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff where I'm like, this is really good. And I do get it. Like, would I prefer it to be a completely fresh reboot? Yeah. I think like so far it's kind of worked for me, even though it's not my ideal way to do it. Just because I liked the Suicide Squad and I also really loved Peacemaker, and I've only seen a few episodes of Creature Commandos so far, but I really like it. And I think one thing that I really like about Creature Commandos a lot is it leans heavily into it being a comic book universe. Like, there are locations that don't exist in our current world that look straight out of a comic book, and there's characters that look straight out of a comic book. And I like that. And so if he's going to be doing that with Superman, which it seems like he is, that's getting me hyped, because I want a fantasy sci-fi, just world that is not from our own, that doesn't completely mimic our own. Like, I want to be transported into a comic book world. And so that's my big hope for what he's doing. And it seems like he's doing that. So I guess we'll find out in July. But I'm pretty excited. Even if it's not my favorite Superman film, I'm just kind of hyped that we're getting a new Superman film, because it's been way too freaking long.
Yeah, I'm definitely, there was once where I was very kind of, I could take it or leave it about it, but I'm definitely more hyped than not at this moment. They need to get their Batman figured out. They can't let Batman hide in the shadows for like 5 years while they build their DCU. So I really
definitely agree with that.
It's kind of wild that we're getting like Clayface before Batman solo movie, but we'll see.
We'll see. Maybe we won't. Maybe I don't know. I have a feeling that Superman being a hit, which I'm pretty sure it's a surefire chance that is going to be, will kind of not fast track in a way of like rushing things, but like it'll be like a good smack in the face of like, all right, this is real. We gotta get this done.
And if people love this new Superman, we're so used, and we already have other superheroes in it. We're so used to shared universes that if people really love the Superman, people are going to very quickly be like, I want to see him hang out with the Batman, like there's going to be an immediate desire to see him share screen time with Batman. So, Alrighty.
Awesome. Well, that was a fun discussion. It's good to be back and into the new year. But yeah, thanks for listening. If you haven't yet already, definitely give us a sub on the YouTube channel. Hit the thumbs up on this live stream if you're watching it later. And if not, if you're listening to it on the podcast feed, make sure you give us a 5-star rating and follow us on your favorite streaming platform, because it helps get our show seen by more people. So yeah, thanks for tuning in. Thank you for everyone who was chatting with us in the live stream. It was fun getting everyone's input, and that's why we do this, because we like having a more interactive experience for everyone, and just it's not just us discussing it, but it's everyone who joins in on the stream and chats with us about it. That's what makes it super fun for us. So thank you for tuning in. And as always, go support your local theaters, and we'll see you next time. I almost